Namaste. This is a description, and this is kind of a long, hopefully not too long, presentation on the descriptions of the spiritual realm. But I hope you'll get the insights to understand that there are a few other places besides the Vedic text where such descriptions of the spiritual realm can be found or are so complete. The spiritual world is not a myth, although it may certainly be a mystery to those without sufficient knowledge or experience. Many traditions, religions, or cultures, for that matter, from around the world tell of another world or realm, or the afterlife, or a heavenly or spiritual abode, but many of them do not say much about it, but only give hints as to its real nature, leaving the rest up to one's imagination. And heaven is the heavenly planets that are still within this material creation. They are not spiritual. The Vedic texts, however, have many descriptions of what the spiritual world is like. In fact, more than you will find anywhere else. So you will have to take a few of these to get a good idea of the conditions there are. So you might say, this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is not all the descriptions that are available. In fact, such as the Puranas, as the Bhagavad, the Vishnu, the Garuda Purana, and others explain many of the Lord's pastimes and expansions as they are found in the spiritual world, as well as the activities that he and his devotees display within this material creation. The Chaitanya Charitamrita by Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami has some important verses that summarize what many of the Vedic texts describe and explain the nature of the spiritual world. Now, in the Adi Lila portion of this book, chapter 5, we find that the spiritual sky is called Vaikuntha, which means where there is no anxiety. It is all-pervading, infinite, and the supreme abode. It is filled with innumerable spiritual planets, each of which is a residence of one of the unlimited expansions of the Supreme Being. The highest planet is called Krishna Loka, which is the residence of Lord Krishna himself, the source of all other expansions of God. It is divided into the divisions of Dwarka, Mathura, and Gokula. All of these divisions also appear on earth, where the Supreme Being comes to display his pastimes. Gokula is also called Viraja or Vrindavan and is the highest of all. And these abodes that appear on earth are expansions of that supreme spiritual atmosphere and non-different in quality to the places in the spiritual world, though it may take some purified and spiritualized consciousness to be able to recognize them. And this has always been the case. Nonetheless, Lord Krishna expands into many forms, beginning with his form as Sri Baladev, also called Balaram, who is considered Lord Krishna's brother. It is said by the energy of Lord Baladev that the spiritual world exists. In the Madhya Lila section of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, chapter 21, verses 55 through 57, the spiritual planets are also described as larger than we can imagine, larger than any material universe. Each planet is also made of spiritual bliss. All of the inhabitants are associates of the Supreme Lord. And then in chapter 20, verses 257 through 258, the spiritual world is referred to as the abode of the pastimes of the eternal spiritual energy. So there are also many places in, say, the Brahma Samhita, for example, which describe the nature and activities of the spiritual realm. In verse 29, for example, we find that the Lord engages in many playful pastimes. That's all he has to do. He doesn't go around managing the material world. His expansions do that for him. He himself just plays. It's called Leela. So he is not some old man sitting in the sky in a chair trying to manage everything while overlooking the material creation, or telling this person to go to heaven and that person to go to hell or whatever. Instead, we find that Lord Krishna is engaged in playfully tending the cows with his many friends, or engaged in dancing, having picnics, teasing his relatives, or sporting with friends in the abodes built with spiritual gems and surrounded by millions of wish-fulfilling trees, which means trees that can give you practically anything you want, any fruit or substance that you like. He is served with great reverence and affection by thousands of goddesses of fortune. In verse 2, it states that Gokula, the supreme abode and planet, appears like a lotus flower with 1,000 petals. So life there is eternal, as is everything else in the spiritual world, and full of bliss and knowledge. It is full of pure devotees who have unlimited facility for their loving service to the Supreme Being. That's what the spiritual world is for. There are beautiful homes and gardens with ample vegetables, flowers, and jewels. Each person is full with all beauty, wealth, strength, fame, knowledge, and bliss. They also wear the most beautiful of clothes and fly in wondrous planes around the spiritual planets. All walking is a dance and all speech is a song. The water is nectar and the land is like touchstone. So in the Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd canto, 15th chapter, there is the following description of the kingdom of God. Quote, "In the spiritual sky, there are spiritual planets known as Vaikunthas, which are the residence of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and His pure devotees, and are worshipped by the residents of all the material planets. In the Vaikuntha Planets, all the residents are similar in form to the Supreme Lord, and they are all engaged in devotional service to the Lord without desires for sense gratification. In the Vaikuntha Planets is the Supreme Person, who is the original person and who can be understood through the Vedic literature. He is full of uncontaminated motive goodness with no place for passion or ignorance, and he contributes religious progress for the devotees. In those Vaikuntha Planets there are many forests which are very auspicious. In those forests the trees are desire trees, trees that fulfill all desires, and in all seasons they are filled with flowers and fruits, because everything in the Vaikuntha Planets is spiritual and personal. In the Vaikuntha Planets, the inhabitants fly in their airplanes, accompanied by their wives and consorts, and eternally sing of the character and activities of the Lord, which is always devoid of all inauspicious qualities. While singing the glories of the Lord, they deride even the presence of the blossoming Madhavi flowers, which are fragrant and laden with honey. When the king of bees hums in a high pitch, singing the glories of the Lord, there is a temporary lull in the noise of the pigeon, the cuckoo, the crane, the chakravarka, the swan, the parrot, the partridge, and the peacock. Such transcendental birds stop their own singing simply to hear the glories of the Lord. Although the flowering plants, like the mandara, the kunda, kurabaka, utpala, champaka, arna, punaga, nagakesara, bakula, the lily, and the parijata flowers are all full of transcendental fragrance, they are still conscious of the austerities performed by the tulsi plant. For tulsi is given special preference by the Lord, who garlands himself with such tulsi leaves. The inhabitants of Vaikuntha travel in their airplanes made of lapis lazuli, emerald, and even gold. Although crowded by their consorts, who have large hips and beautifully smiling faces, they cannot be stimulated to passion by their mirth and beautiful charms. The ladies in the Vaikuntha Planets are as beautiful as the goddess of fortune herself. But such transcendently beautiful ladies, their hands playing with lotuses and their leg bangles tinkling, are sometimes seen sweeping the marble walls, which are bedecked at intervals with golden borders in order to receive the grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The goddesses of fortune worship the Lord in their own gardens by offering tulsi leaves on the coral-paved banks of transcendental reservoirs of water. While offering worship to the Lord, they can see on the water the reflection of their beautiful faces with raised noses, and it appears that they have become more beautiful because of the Lord's kissing their faces. It is very much regrettable that unfortunate people do not discuss the description of the Vaikuntha Planets, but engage in topics which are unworthy to hear or basically waste one's time, and which bewilder one's intelligence. Those who give up the topics of Vaikuntha and take talk of the material world are thrown into the darkest region of ignorance." End quote. Thus ends the quote from the Srimad Bhagavatam in this description. Of course, when it talks about the ladies, the airplanes, made of lapis lazuli and gold, don't forget, this is all spiritual elements. These are the spiritual aspects of these kind of elements. So it's not like the material aspect, which still has a beginning and an end, or which is affected by time. Time is said to be conspicuous by its absence in the spiritual realm. So the Vedic texts further describe that in the center of all the spiritual Vaikuntha planets is the planet known as Krishna Loka, or Goloka Vrindavan, which is the personal abode of the original Supreme Personality of God, Sri Krishna. Krishna enjoys his transcendental bliss in multiple forms on that planet, and all the opulences of the Vaikuntha planets are found there. This planet is shaped like a lotus flower, and many kinds of pastimes are taking place on each leaf of that lotus, as described in the Brahma Samhita, verses 2 and 4. And I quote, "The super excellent station of Krishna, which is known as Gokula, has thousands of petals and a corolla like that of a lotus sprouted from a part of his infinitary aspect, the whirl of the leaves being the actual abode of Krishna. The whirl of that eternal realm, Gokula, is the hexagonal abode of Krishna. Its petals are the abodes of the gopis or friends who are part and parcel of Krishna, to whom they are most lovingly devoted and are similar in essence. The petals shine beautifully like so many walls. The extended leaves of that lotus are the garden-like dham or spiritual abode of Sri Radhika, the most beloved of Lord Krishna." End quote. So in this way we can understand that the spiritual realm is not some form of nothingness, as some people may imagine, or simply a great white light which we all merge into. Even though that is there, still it is further described that there are millions of Vaikuntha planets, each with a form or expansion of the Supreme Being who resides on it. Each resident of the spiritual world goes to whichever planet has the form of God to which he or she is most attracted. Each Vaikuntha planet is self-effulgent and many millions of times brighter than the sun. Material time and the modes of nature have no influence in the spiritual realm. There is no birth, death, old age, or disease, and no past, present, or future. Time is conspicuous by its absence, and everything, including the homes, the trees, the animals, and plants, are all eternal. It is full of beauty and bliss. This is the spiritual nature of the spiritual world. The Lord is like a blazing fire, and the spiritual entities are like sparks of that fire, who engage in unlimited varieties of service for the Lord's enjoyment. Since the Lord is also the source of all pleasure and happiness, when the living entities come in contact with the Supreme, they also feel a happiness which far supersedes any pleasure they could feel through contact with the material energy. Because the innumerable spiritual entities are engaged in serving and pleasing the Lord in this way, which is their natural constitutional spiritual position, they also feel a bliss which knows no bounds. They feel that there could be nothing better that they could do or would want to do. Thus they all feel perfectly situated. So why does the Lord create the spiritual sparks, or the innumerable living entities? Because he is the source of both the unlimited and limited potencies. The Lord is only complete when he displays all of his energies. The unlimited spiritual potency is exhibited by the spiritual world. The limited energy is exhibited in the material cosmos. And the marginal potency, which are the living beings themselves, can be either in the spiritual or the material world, because they are, being marginal, material or spiritual energy, depending on their consciousness. To exhibit his omnipotency, the Supreme exhibits all of his energies. In this way, the Lord is the source of all potencies, including all pleasure potencies for which all living entities are hankering. When they come in contact with the Lord through the service attitude for pleasing him, they are also full of all pleasure and happiness. In the same way that a spark becomes bright, again, when in contact with the blazing fire. Because the Lord is the reservoir of all pleasure, and also enjoys spiritual ecstasies, there are the living beings who also give him happiness and provide the means for many pastimes in which there are varieties of pleasurable exchanges between them. The living beings provide the means for the Lord's variegated activities. Without the spiritual entities, the Lord would remain inactive, although he is complete in himself. However, merely by looking at all the activity within the material creation, we can see that there are unlimited activities. Thus we can get a clue as to how much more active is the spiritual realm. We can plainly see that we are not alone. So it is illogical to think that there are no activities in the spiritual realm, or that it is merely some inactive void or great white light. There is a whole other realm beyond that great Brahman, because it is said that within that Brahman float the Vaikuntha, or spiritual planets. In this way we can begin to understand that the spiritual world is simply for the transcendental loving relationships and recreational activities that expand the happiness and love of all, without the limitations found within the material existence. Besides, what is the meaning of the word Lord if there is no one to overlord? Similarly, a king without subjects has no meaning. Thus the spirit souls are the complementary side of the Supreme Being, and are his parts and parcels. So it is natural that there are reciprocal feelings of love between the infinitesimal living beings and the infinite Supreme Being. This form of love between the Supreme and his spiritual parts and parcels is the ultimate loving relationship. Every other form of love is but a dim reflection. When the living beings display their pure spiritual tendencies to serve the Lord, they become liberated souls in the spiritual world. This is the whole process of the spiritual path. It's the whole purpose of yoga. So, this is the goal, to ultimately go back to the spiritual world in our true constitutional positions. As it is further described, the Vaikuntha planets of the spiritual world float in the Brahman effulgence. Some call this the great white light or void, but merging into this Brahman is for those who prefer to exist in a spiritual vacuum, so to speak, floating in an eternal sky without any form or activities. For this reason, it is considered an incomplete level of spiritual realization or existence. It is described further in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Lila, chapter 2, verse 5, what the Upanishads describe as the impersonal Brahman is but the effulgence of his body, and the Lord, known as the Supersoul, is but his localized plenary portion. He is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna himself, full with 6 opulences. He is the absolute truth, and no other truth is greater than or equal to him. That's from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Lila, chapter 2, verse 5. And then the Brahma Samhita, chapter 5, verse 40, similarly describes the Brahman as being emanated from the body of Lord Krishna. And a quote here, I worship Govinda, Krishna, the primeval Lord, whose effulgence is the source of the non-differential Brahman mentioned in the Upanishads, being differentiated from the mundane universe and appears as indivisible, infinite, and limitless truth. Unquote. So herein we can understand that the Brahman effulgence, or the great white light in the spiritual sky, is nothing but the bodily rays coming from the Supreme Being, Sri Krishna. It is within those bodily rays that the unlimited Vaikuntha planets float, and into which the innumerable impersonalist philosophers merge, who have attained liberation from material existence through yoga, and who think there is ultimately no Supreme Being. However, such liberated souls who merge into the Brahman have no spiritual form or body, but remain only as a spiritual spark, without any activity, floating in the Vaikuntha sky. The Upanishads, focusing on describing the non-material aspect of the Supreme and spiritual truth, especially put emphasis on the great impersonal Brahman effulgence. The Mundaka Upanishad, for example, in 2 verses 10 through 12, provides additional insight into the nature of the Brahman, which is still part of the spiritual world. And it says, and I quote, in the spiritual realm beyond the material covering is the unlimited Brahman effulgence, which is free from material contamination. That effulgent white light is understood by transcendentalists to be the light of all lights. In that realm there is no need of sunshine, moonshine, fire, or electricity for illumination. Indeed, whatever illumination appears in the material world is only a reflection of that supreme illumination. That Brahman is in front and in back, in the north, south, east, and west, and also overhead and below. In other words, that supreme Brahman effulgence spreads throughout both the material and spiritual skies. End quote. So the above 2 verses mean 2 things. First, the very word Brahman being the bodily rays of the Supreme Being and being an effulgence, which must come from a source, means that the Brahman cannot exist without its source. Therefore, by implication, the Brahman means also the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Secondly, the rays and spiritual force of the Brahman also pervades the material creation. It is in a corner of this Brahman in which the material creation manifests like a cloud. Within that cloud, the necessary transformations take place in order to create the material elements. Also, the planets, universes, and innumerable living beings. However, between the material universes and the brilliant effulgence of the Brahman is what is called the Viraja Nadi, or Brahma Loka. And that is like a river, also called the Viraja River, which is the separation between the spiritual world and the material world, or the material creation. It is within the confines of the cloudy Viraja River that the material manifestation takes place. The millions of universes in the material creation float on the waters of that Viraja River. Just like the Vaikuntha Planets float in the Brahman, the spiritual sky, so similarly the many universes float in this Viraja River, or the cause of material creation. On one side of this river are the material universes, and on the other side are the spiritual Vaikuntha planets, which float within the Brahman effulgence. The Viraja River is a marginal position between the material and spiritual realms, and is thus not under the control of the material energy. That is why those persons who merge into the Viraja River are considered to have escaped material existence, yet have still not quite entered the real spiritual worlds. In this way, the Viraja River is also a shelter for those living beings who are disgusted with material life and who have become successful in a religious or philosophical discipline that is bereft of true spiritual knowledge, or knowledge of the spiritual planets. For example, the goal of Buddhists is to reach nirvana in the great white light, or clear void. This void is found in the existence in that Viraja River, which is outside of the material worlds but still not in the spiritual realm. It is in between. Therein they deny the variegatedness of material existence as well as that of spiritual existence. Thus, if they wish to leave material life, yet still have no true understanding of spiritual life, or life on the Vaikuntha planets, it is into this area in which they merge, if they are successful. Without knowledge or the practice of life in the spiritual world, they cannot go beyond this Viraja area. Thus, it is to our advantage to study what is the spiritual realm and how to follow the process best to attain it, as described in the Vedic literature. That is the means of becoming truly free from the limited material existence within this cosmic creation, which was created for the materially conditioned souls who prefer to attempt to satisfy all of their material desires. That is also why it is best to continue to hear about and familiarize ourselves with the deeper and blissful aspects of the spiritual world, such as with additional descriptions as follows. And this one is from the Gautamiya Tantra, verse number 4, and I quote, Vrindavan Dham is a place of ever-increasing joy. Flowers and fruits of all seasons grow there, and that transcendental land is full of the sweet sound of various birds. All directions resound with the humming of bumblebees, and it is served with the cool breezes of the spiritual waters of the Jamuna River. Vrindavan is decorated with wish-fulfilling trees wound with creepers and beautiful flowers. Its divine beauty is ornamented with the pollen of red, blue, and white lotuses, and the ground is made of jewels whose dazzling glory is equal to a myriad of suns rising in the sky at one time. On that ground is a garden of desire trees, which always shower divine love. In that garden is a jeweled temple whose pinnacle is made of rubies. It is decorated with various jewels, so it remains brilliantly effulgent through all seasons of the year. And that temple is beautified with bright-colored canopies, glittering with various gems, and endowed with ruby-decorated coverings and jeweled gateways and arches. Its splendor is equal to millions of suns, and it is eternally free from the 6 waves of material miseries. In that temple there is a great golden throne inlaid with many jewels, and this way one should meditate on the divine realm of the Supreme Lord, Sri Vrindavan Dham. Now this end quote. Now this last description we will offer here from the Brahma Samhita, verse 56, which is also a description of the spiritual realm. End quote. I worship the transcendental seat known as Svetadvip, whereas loving consorts, the Lakshmis in their unalloyed spiritual essence, practice the amorous service of the Supreme Lord Krishna as their only lover. Where every tree is a transcendental purpose tree, where the soil is the purpose gem, water is nectar, every word is a song, every gait is a dance, the flute is the favorite attendant, effulgence is full of transcendental bliss, and the supreme spiritual entities are all enjoyable and tasty. Where numberless milch cows always emit transcendental oceans of milk, where there is eternal existence of transcendental time, who is ever present and without past or future, and hence is not subject to the quality of passing away, even for the duration of half a moment. That realm is known as Goloka, only to a very few self-realized souls within this world. So thank you very much. There's much more information on my website and in my books that you can meditate on and read and study more deliberately than just listening to me or watching this video. So I hope you'll take advantage of that. And in the meantime, best of luck. Good luck with your spiritual development. And Namaste and Jai Shri Krishna.